Denuvo is a name many recognise and despise. Denuvo is a digital rights management bloatware that drastically restricts media it's attached to in an effort to prevent piracy. It has been accused of slowing performance and loading times by those people who play games, people who crack games, and even by those who make games. Denuvo has even been known to downright prevent those who bought these games from playing them. It's no wonder then that gamers clamour for developers to remove Denuvo as soon as their game is cracked. A few do heed their calls, as was the case with Doom, Inside and Rime. This video will explore why other developers don't, and analyse what incentives they might have to stick with Denuvo, even after their game has been cracked. So if you'd like more content like this, please like, share, subscribe, press the bell and select all. Follow us on Twitter while you're at it. There are 3 reasons developers might want to keep Denuvo in games that have been cracked: reliability of the crack, reliability of the build that was cracked, and future content. The first reason developers might want to stick with Denuvo, even after their game has been cracked, is the possibility that the crack may not be reliable, even if it seems stable in the first 2 weeks and months after its release. A notable example of this is the Empress crack of Immortals Phoenix Rising. While the crack may have appeared to be stable at the time of its release, pirates soon had to deal with an unstable experience that would crash in various scenarios. Empress did release 2 fixes, but this did not prevent the crack from breaking down past a certain date. Now it refused to run unless pirates wind their system clock back to a specific date and time. Doing this causes a ton of problems just browsing the internet, so it's not something you'd want to do. This problem was also present in the paradox crack of Monster Hunter World Iceborne, even though this was a scene release, which usually signifies reliability, since scene groups have to follow certain standards or risk getting their releases nuked by another scene group who has managed to release a proper crack. In this case though, the paradox crack of Iceborne was not nuked, even though Codex released a proper crack of the update that removed Denuvo from the game. Perhaps Codex deemed it would have looked hypocritical to nuke paradox crack for instability past a certain date, considering the 2019 crack Codex release for Jedi Fallen Order broke down at the end of that year. The point is, cracks are stable until they aren't. Neither pirates nor developers can determine if a crack will remain functional forever, since many cracks are encrypted to prevent Denuvo from analysing and improving their protection. Until a proper perennial crack is released, pirates will have an inferior experience to players who bought the game, which gives people an incentive to buy the game. The removal of Denuvo has always been followed by the release of a proper crack, and this history provides developers an incentive to stick with Denuvo. There can still be incentives for developers to keep Denuvo even if the crack is perfect. It can only be as stable as the build that it cracks. If the legitimate game is unstable, so is its crack. The developer can still work on the game and dispatch patches to deliver newer, stabler, better builds for people that have bought the game. These new builds of the game will be bundled with the newest version of Denuvo, which makes it impossible to use the old crack for the updated game files. The new build has to be cracked, just like a game that hasn't been cracked yet. And until a stable crack of a stable build is available, pirates will always have an inferior experience compared to players who buy the game. Even if pirates can enjoy a stable experience, the developers have a third incentive to stick with Denuvo: upcoming downloadable content. For an illustrative example, let's look at Assassin's Creed Valhalla, one of the biggest Denuvo-protected games. Ubisoft released Valhalla in November 2020, after saddling it with a combination of VM Protect and Denuvo. It resisted piracy for 4 months before it was cracked by Empress. While this gave pirates a way to play Valhalla without paying for it, Ubisoft did not remove Denuvo, as it had several expansions and DLC in the works. These would be delivered in updates that were protected in newer versions of Denuvo, and so could not be cracked by the files from the Empress release. At the time of making this video, no DLCs or expansions of Valhalla have been cracked. In fact, Ubisoft is still adding content to Valhalla to this day, and this serves as an incentive to keep Denuvo in the game. Cracking groups are also incentivized to wait until the developer is done adding content to the game so they can crack it all in one release. In other words, regular updates dissuade cracking groups from spending time on breaking the Denuvo protection of a build that will soon be outdated. If the updates did not have Denuvo, every update will be immediately cracked, as is observed in games that never used Denuvo, and pirates would have access to the new content at the same time as people who paid extra for it. Ubisoft would prefer their buyers to have earlier access to their content. Well, any publisher would like their buyers to have exclusive access, but they'll settle for earlier access than pirates, and Denuvo serves that purpose, at least at the time of making this video. This covers the incentives developers have to keep Denuvo in their games after they're cracked. Have they any reason to remove Denuvo after their games are cracked? Of course, many would argue. Provide a better product for their consumers by removing a burden that could one day break their game forever. Yeah, but these companies don't care about that. Do corporations have any selfish incentive to remove Denuvo after their games are cracked? Yes and no, depending on the time. The only thing companies care about is money, and this could be an incentive to remove Denuvo, depending on the length of time that has elapsed since the game's launch. In November 2020, a contract signed by Denuvo and Crytek was leaked, and this revealed the fees the developers paid to implement Denuvo in Crysis Remastered, which launched on the 18th of September 2020, and was cracked by CPY 34 days later. However, Crytek did not remove Denuvo at this point, since the game was noticeably incomplete and so was a crack. Ascension, one of the story levels from the original Crysis, had not been added to Crysis Remastered at launch, and thus was missing in the build that was cracked. Crytek finally restored the missing level into Crysis Remastered in December 2020, along with a ton of bug fixes, several weeks after CPY released their crack. This update was protected by Denuvo, and hence could not be bypassed with any files at the time, meaning pirates were stuck with an outdated, buggy, and incomplete experience. This gave Crysis enthusiasts an incentive to buy Crysis Remastered, which was one benefit Crytek derived from the money they paid Denuvo. Speaking of which, how much was Denuvo paid to protect Crysis Remastered? The leaked document suggests Denuvo billed Crytek €126,000, which appears to be a discount for releasing Crysis Remastered before March 31st, 2021. If Crytek had launched the game after this date, they would have paid €60,000 as an anti-tamper fee and €80,000 for unique encryption for a total of €140,000. How many copies of Crysis Remastered would they have to sell to recoup this investment? Crytek launched Crysis Remastered as a €30 title exclusively on the Epic Store, which takes 12% of the revenue from the sale of any game on it. Crytek would keep 88% of €30, which amounts to €26.4. Crytek would have to sell 4,773 copies at full price to offset the €126,000 they paid Denuvo. It's a shame they didn't spend that money on including Crysis' multiplayer in the remaster. Multiplayer has always been much harder to crack than Denuvo. Multiplayer cracks are far rarer than Denuvo cracks for games that do not use Steamworks to connect players, which did not apply to Crysis Remastered as it was an Epic exclusive. Furthermore, multiplayer is an actual feature that would have provided a tangible benefit for buyers and a legitimate incentive to purchase a game for years to come. Sadly, Crytek preferred to pay Denuvo to inconvenience their paying customers with an incomplete yet encumbered product. With that said, Crytek did make an agreement with Epic Games to make Crysis Remastered an Epic exclusive for its first year, and Epic is known to offer substantial financial incentives to developers in return for making their games Epic exclusive, including marketing commitments, development funding, or revenue guarantees. This could have offset the costs of Denuvo. If the game did too well though, Denuvo would charge an additional fee. An additional one-off fee of €60,000 shall be payable by the licensee 30 days following the first day where there were more than 500,000 cumulative first-time activations of the title at any time within the term. This would have cost Crytek the revenue from 2,273 sales at full price. What did they get in return? Denuvo offers a number of services to developers, but the most notable is usage on event preview, beta, demo, retail versions, as well as post-release patches included. This covered the update that fixed and completed Crysis Remastered weeks after its old build was cracked. Crytek had already paid to protect these updates, which kept them out of pirates' reach for months. What incentive did they have to remove Denuvo at this point? None, if the leaked contract is to be believed. However, Crytek did remove Denuvo when they launched the game on Steam 1 year after its debut as an exclusive on the Epic Store. There was a reason for this, and the leaked contract explains why. If licensee wishes to extend the anti-tamper protection beyond the term of 12 months, counting from the street date of the title, licensee shall send a respective advance written notice to Denuvo. The additional anti-tamper fee for each month beyond the term of 12 months, counting from the street date of the title, shall be €2,000. Since Steam takes a 30% cut from every sale until the game surpasses 10 million in revenue, Crytek will receive only €21 for every copy they sold on Steam. Denuvo's monthly fee of €2,000 cost Crytek the revenue from 95 sales on Steam every month. Denuvo would also charge Crytek an additional platform fee of €10,000, which would cost Crytek the revenue from more than 476 sales. Apparently, Crytek didn't think this was worth it as they launched Crysis Remastered on Steam without Denuvo. They also took the time to patch Denuvo out on the Epic Store through an update. That doesn't mean Crytek was done with Denuvo though. The leaked contract reveals identical terms for the Denuvo protection of Crysis 2 Remastered, except Denuvo reduced the initial fee to €112,000. Crytek would have to sell 4,243 additional copies of Crysis 2 Remastered to recoup Denuvo's launch protection fee. Of course, Crysis 2 Remastered also launched as an Epic exclusive, for which Crytek must have received substantial financial incentives. The fact that Denuvo is going to charge €2,000 for each month beyond the term of 12 months gives Crytek an incentive to remove Denuvo on the game's first year anniversary, like they did with Crysis 1 Remastered. This incentive hasn't persuaded everyone to drop Denuvo from their older games though, and there are plenty of examples. Watch Dogs 2, Assassin's Creed Origins, Metal Gear Solid 5, The Phantom Pain. These are just a few of the many games that still retain Denuvo years after they were cracked. Why have their developers kept Denuvo in their games if Denuvo charges a monthly fee of €2,000? Perhaps this wasn't in the contract for the older titles. Denuvo wasn't as widely adopted in the mid-2010s as it is now, and a lot can change in half a decade. Let's look at how much Denuvo charged for its service in 2016, using research conducted by a Reddit user named Random Dude, whom we shall henceforth refer to as the Impersonator. He pretended to be an obscure game developer, and Denuvo fell for it, divulging a treasure trove of information which we'll now dig into. Denuvo gave developers two ways to pay for their services. The first was a lump sum payment, with the amount ranging from €10,000 for indie titles that sold less than 100,000 copies on PC, to €50,000 for AA titles that sold 500,000 units on PC, to €100,000 for a AAA title that sold more than 500,000 units on PC. Assuming a launch price of €60, AAA companies would have to sell 2,381 units on Steam, or 1,667 units on their own distribution platforms to recoup the €100,000 they gave Denuvo. The other option asked for €2,500 up front as a setup fee and €0.15 per unit reported monthly based on Steam owners. We reckon most companies that use Denuvo opted for the lump sum model, as €100,000 is chump change in the context of development costs. Regardless of the payment model chosen, developers get the latest version of Denuvo to use on their patches, DLCs, expansions, and Game of the Year editions, though there don't seem to be any developers still releasing content for these older titles. When the final edition of a game is eventually cracked, as was the case with Watch Dogs 2, Assassin's Creed Origins, and all older titles, Denuvo has exhausted its purpose and only serves to inconvenience paying customers from that point onwards. This is what happened in December 2017, when a problem with Denuvo's authentication servers prevented buyers from playing legitimate copies of Shadow of War, Mad Max, and Arkham Knight. All three games had already been cracked by this point, so pirates were unaffected by Denuvo's outage. Ironically, buyers would have to crack their legitimate installation if they wanted to play while Denuvo was down. The story goes deeper with Mad Max and Arkham Knight. Not only were these two games cracked at the time of Denuvo's outage, but they had not been updated since and had reached the end of their life. In other words, the final versions of these games had been cracked, and yet the consumers who had bought the game still had to deal with Denuvo long after it outlived its purpose. Arkham Knight eventually removed Denuvo from its Steam version in December 2020, but not before it had made the game's buyers suffer a worse experience than the pirates who used its crack. But still, better late than never. Mad Max is a particularly odd case, as the developers later released the game on Origin without Denuvo. So why didn't they remove it from the Steam version? Watch Dogs 2 is another game that has stuck with Denuvo even after its final patch has been cracked. Considering that it's been 4 years since its final edition has been cracked, Ubisoft is not likely to remove Denuvo from the game anytime soon. The retention of Denuvo is even worse in Assassin's Creed Origins, considering Codex released a crack that actually removed Denuvo and VM Protect from the complete edition, giving pirates a better experience with quicker loading times and smoother performance than the version consumers paid for. It's hilarious to see a cracking group do Ubisoft's duty for them, though perhaps people who paid for Origins might not find it funny. But your final edition has been cracked. Denuvo serves no purpose anymore. You're just hurting your paying customers by leaving it in. It's been quite negative thus far. Let's take a look at a few developers who took a more sensible approach. Doom removed Denuvo in December 2016, nearly 4 months after Conspiracy cracked it. A Reddit user claiming to be a game developer stated Denuvo has a policy which offers refunds if the game is cracked within a certain time period, which he estimated at around 3 months. Denuvo denied this, stating that they had no deals in place that offered refunds if the game is cracked within a certain time frame, and this is consistent with the information they divulged in the impersonator and in the leaked contract for Crysis Remastered, which does not mention refunds. The reason we trust the impersonator's information is that he provided screenshots of his email conversation with the Denuvo employee. The self-proclaimed game developer provided no proof for his claims, or that he is who he says he is. In fact, he has claimed to work in a completely unrelated field in the past, which further undermines his credibility. The final nail in the coffin is his estimation of Denuvo charging 7 figures to protect AAA games, which is completely off the mark going by the maximum figure of €100,000 Denuvo divulged to the impersonator and in the contract leaked in 2020. If Denuvo wasn't demanding 7 figures in 2020, they certainly weren't in a position to do so in 2016. Back to Denuvo's statement. They stated the reason Doom removed their DRM was that it had accomplished its purpose by keeping the game safe from piracy during the initial sales window. While the nearly 4-month period Doom enjoyed uncracked comfortably encompasses the initial sales window, there may be another reason why Doom dropped Denuvo. Doom did not release any single-player DLC that could have benefited from Denuvo's protection. All Doom DLC was strictly for its multiplayer, which does not need Denuvo to stave off piracy. Therefore, Doom had no reason to stick with Denuvo after it was cracked, and removing it did endear the game to players opposed to Denuvo in principle. This extends to nearly all games that remove Denuvo. They either removed Denuvo after all their single-player DLC was cracked, or they lacked single-player DLC to begin with. There are, however, a few exceptions. The first is Homefront: The Revolution, which dropped Denuvo before it was cracked and consequently was immediately cracked upon Denuvo's removal. The same goes for Titanfall 2, which Codex cracked after its Denuvo protection was removed. Its stellar multiplayer was not cracked, providing an incentive for players to buy the game. Life is Strange Before the Storm is another case where the developers removed Denuvo from the very first episode, without giving it a chance to protect later episodes which were promptly cracked by Codex. The third exception is Hitman, which dropped Denuvo months before releasing its Game of the Year edition, which was subsequently cracked by Plaza. Monster Hunter Stories 2 dropped its Denuvo protection a year after its launch and was immediately cracked by Skid Row, though this release was nuked for being a bad crack that crashed throughout the different gameplay modes. The most interesting instance was Humankind, which dropped Denuvo before it even launched in 2021. This is what its developers had to say. If Denuvo can hold off a cracked version, even just for a few days, that can already help us to protect our launch. That being said, our priority is always the best possible experience for the players who buy our games and support us. Denuvo should never impact player performance, and we don't want to sacrifice quality for you guys. We found that the way it was currently integrated was not good enough, and it's not something we can fix before release, so we're taking it out. This is a kind of company we wish was more common in the industry, a company that cares for its consumers' experience. However, most corporations seem to tread in the opposite direction, shoving Denuvo and other restrictions on consumers while killing the games they've already paid for without the courtesy of a refund. We've explored the legality of this in another video, so go watch that if you haven't already. And if you like this video, please click the like button and share it too, since YouTube won't. There's more content like this on the way, so please subscribe, click the bell and select all. And that concludes our examination of the incentives developers have to keep or remove Denuvo from their games.